Hello, my name's Kingsley Singleton and welcome to this video lesson from Digital Photo, the UK's best-selling photography and imaging magazine. One style of picture that your landscape portfolio should never be without is a panorama, so that's what we're going to look at in this video lesson. A panorama is a super wide view that packs in much more detail than you could ever hope to in a single frame, and this makes it one of the best ways to do justice to really great scenery. And it's a technique that you really must give a try because as soon as you've made a panoramic image, you'll be hooked. All you need to do to create one is shoot a series of overlapping pictures from the same vantage point, and then let Photoshop or Elements blend them together. The tools used to do this blending, or stitching as it's often called, are very powerful and very good at their job. They'll stick virtually any series of pictures together once you load them in. But to make sure you get some really classy results, it's best that you know how to shoot your panoramic image in the right way. There are details on how to do this in this month's magazine, and if you take a look at the start images we're using for this technique, you'll see that we've followed some good practice. We've got 5 pictures that overlap a decent amount, and ones that have a nice consistent exposure as well. That's perfect fodder for a panoramic image. So these shots should certainly not give the software any problems when it comes to stitching them together, producing something like this. A really nice panoramic shot. Once all the separate pictures are stitched together, we've used some very simple techniques to clean it up a little and add a bit of contrast. Just the sort of basic adjustments that you'd want to make to any landscape image in Photoshop or Elements. But before I close down this finished version and get on with the technique itself, it's worth mentioning that although the view is a lot wider than you'd normally expect to see, we've used the same simple compositional tricks that you'll find on many landscapes. Here, this nicely weather-beaten little tree is placed on one of the thirds of the frame to anchor the scene and provide a little bit of foreground interest. So it's well worth looking out for similar subjects when you're out shooting your panoramas. Okay, so now hopefully you want to give it a go so we can close down our finished shot and we can go back to our start images which you'll find on this month's CD, and they're simply called Cat Bells 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. And before we start the technique proper, it's also worth pointing out that these shots have undergone a quite a simple split raw conversion just to balance the sky and the landscape a little bit better. So it's a good idea to do any manipulation on the single images before you come to start stitching them together. You'll find out how to do a split raw conversion and prepare your panoramic images in another video lesson on this month's CD. But in this case, once all the pictures are open on screen, the ones you want to use in your panorama, we can come up to File, down to New and pick Photo Merge Panorama. If you're using the full version of Photoshop, you'll find it under File, Automate and then Photo Merge. So whichever one you've got, give that a click and you'll see a very similar dialog box appear, in this case asking us which pictures we want to use and how we want to put them together. So the first thing I need to do is add the files that I want to make up the panorama into this little box here, and I can do that just simply by clicking Add Open Files. Only problem is it's added the finished example shot that I showed you at the start as well, because that's also open, so to get rid of that we'll just highlight it and click Remove. Those are the files we want to use, so the next step is to tell Photoshop exactly how we want them to be put together. Now it might seem like a bit of a cheat, but the best option is just to leave it set to auto. As I said before, the software and the algorithms that are used to stitch these panoramic images together are very complicated. They've been developed over a long period of time and they're very good at what they do. So most of the time you'll get great results by sticking to auto. It's only really once you've made your shot and perhaps you're not happy with the results that you should start looking at some of these other options. And if that's the case, you'll probably find that the interactive layout option at the bottom of the palette there is probably the best one to go for, because it lets you push and pull the images around at the same time as Photoshop is kind of working on them, and that way you can get a bit more involved in the process and fine-tune the results a little bit more closely. But as I say, we're going to use the auto option for this panorama that we're making, so once that's selected, all that's left to do is click OK and Photoshop or Elements will begin the process. So here we can see Photoshop working away and blending those pictures together, and at the moment we've still got some hard edges running through the image, but that'll be sorted by this phase that's going on now, the blend selected layer based on content bar that's inching its way across the screen there. And once it's completed, all of these hard edges should probably disappear. And there we go. Elements, in a matter of moments there, has done what would have probably taken me about a day's worth of repositioning and masking and erasing and generally sort of messing about. And we've got a really nice panoramic image all stitched together, and it's looking pretty good. And just going back to what I was saying before about the software being very powerful and very good at what it does, I didn't use any kind of specialist panoramic tripod head when shooting the images to stitch together. I just did it handheld, and although I kind of followed some best practice in rotating the camera the right way, it really does go to prove that you can shoot pretty much any series of images, and as long as you follow a few basic rules, Photoshop or Elements will be able to stitch them together. At least 99 times out of 100 anyway. What it is worth doing though is just zooming in to the image and having a bit of a look around, just holding down the space bar there to bring up the hand tool so we can scroll around and have a really good look, and just make sure that there are no kind of hard edges or anything too unnatural looking. And it seems to me that we've got a pretty good result here. So we can come back out to a full view now, and we can move on to the next stage of the panoramic process, which is to get rid of all these checkered areas, these parts of the image where there are no pixels. And these have all appeared because of the way that Elements has had to warp and twist the different images that we've given it into this lovely wide view. And if I come up to Window and down to Layers to bring our Layers palette on screen, you can see just how Photoshop has actually done it. And I'll just increase the size of our layer thumbnails there, just so we get a good look. And you can see that each of the images that we fed into the photo merge command there has been distorted slightly and shifted around so it matches up with the next. And then these little layer masks have been added just to blend all of those separate exposures together. So getting on with the job of losing these transparent areas here, we'll just slide that layers palette out of the way for a moment. The easiest way to do it is using the crop tool. First though, because we're quite happy with the way that the picture's been stitched together, we can flatten it by coming up to Layer and down to Flatten Image. All of those checkerboard areas get replaced with white. And then we can pick the crop tool from the toolbox, which in this case is hiding under the recompose tool there. So just hold down your left mouse button on that and pick the crop tool from the list. And then to use the crop tool, we'll first make sure that the aspect ratio up here in the options bar is set to no restriction. If it's not, just choose no restriction from the drop down list, or if you're in Photoshop, hit the clear button, which will be hiding on the right hand side of the options bar. And then we'll just simply click and drag out a cropping marquee roughly over those areas that we want to keep in our panoramic shot. Now the way that the pictures have been warped into the single wide view has left us with a little bit of a problem, because although I want to crop out those white areas like this, I really don't want to lose too much of my picture. In this case I'm going to be losing the top of the tree there, don't want that, and I'm going to be taking out far too much of the lower part of the image too. The important thing is to realise that you're not restricted by this. We can get rid of those white areas in different ways. So now in this case just make a crop that you're really happy with. I'm going to go for something like this. So we do still have that little white area in the top left and the bottom right, but I'll show you how to deal with those in a moment. Perhaps we'll just have a little more sky there. That's looking pretty good. So we can hit the tick there at the bottom of the cropping marquee, or we can hit return on the keyboard to finalize that crop, and immediately that's starting to look a lot more like a proper panoramic image. So what about these empty areas? Well, we're going to deal with them using the clone stamp tool. So it's back over to the toolbox, give that one a click, and then up in the options bar we want to set that size up to around about 400 pixels. It doesn't have to be exactly that, and of course it will depend on the size of the image that you're working on, but generally just use a large brush in this case. We'll set the mode to normal, the opacity to 100%, and then it's a simple matter really of just holding down the Alt key to bring up our sampling icon there, clicking on a clean bit of sky, and then just painting that over the top. And pretty quickly we'll be able to paint in a few new clouds there, and just get rid of those nasty white areas. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. We can deal with this other area too, down here in the bottom right hand corner, and once again we simply hold down the Alt key, click to sample a bit of that foreground and paint it over the top. Now here we've copied a bit too much of it there, I think, so we've got a repeating pattern, and if this happens, just drop the size of your clone stamp tool, just using the left square bracket key on the keyboard this time, sample again, and then we can just kind of paint over those repeated areas just so we get a really natural looking effect. Okay, so that's all there really is to stitching together a panoramic shot from a number of separate photos. We've got that really nice wide view anchored by our tree in the foreground there, and it's certainly giving us a much more appealing view than any of those separate shots that we had to start with. What's left to do is just a bit of basic landscape housekeeping really. We want to make a few contrast changes to the shot and just liven up the contrast a little bit to make it a bit more punchy. So to do that, it's back over to the toolbox once more, hold down the mouse button on the polygonal lasso tool there and pick the freehand lasso. And then I'm just going to draw out a pretty loose selection over the top part of the sky there, back round the top, and eventually our marching ants will appear. If you feel like you've missed any parts that you might want to be taking in, we can just hold down the Shift key on the keyboard. We get a little plus sign next to our lasso tool there. We can add to our selection. And then before I bring up the levels palette to darken this area, I'm going to soften the edge of our selection, because we want a nice gradual blend between the areas we're changing and those that we're leaving alone. So let's click on the Refine Edge button up there in the options bar. We'll bring that feather up to about 200 pixels. And if I click on that preview there, you can see the nice gradual edge to that selection we've made. Click OK to add that feathering. Then it's Control and L on the keyboard to bring up the levels palette. If I just drag that down a little, and you can see that when I start to move that mid-tone slider over to the right, we start to darken all of those areas that we selected, just giving it a nice kind of moody quality. Maybe just bring that black point slider in a touch too, and we can just keep on pushing that mid-tone slider over to the point where it's dramatic enough for your own personal taste. So once you're done with that, click OK. Press Ctrl and D on the keyboard to get rid of those marching ants. And just with that very quick and simple alteration, we've created a really nice top to the image, just hemming in the landscape there and sort of bringing our eye down to where we want it on the foreground subject and the hills in the distance beyond. Next up, I'm just going to use the dodge and burn tools very quickly, just to add a bit more contrast around the landscape and maybe darken that sky a little bit more too. So I'll first just press Ctrl and J on the keyboard to copy our background layer. It's always good to dodge and burn on a separate layer to the background, just in case you make any mistakes. And then it's over to the toolbox. We'll pick the burn tool. That's already set up quite well. A nice low exposure, the range set to shadows, and a big brush with a soft edge. So we can then just kind of play that over the sky and just darken that down even further in a few areas that maybe didn't pick up on the levels quite as we wanted to. Just bring that further down into the sky to bring back a bit of detail. You can see it returning as I run the burn tool over it. And then down in the foreground as well, we're going to use the burn tool just to kind of create a little bit of a darker area near the bottom of the frame, having a similar effect to what we did up there with those clouds, just drawing attention into the center of the picture, creating almost a kind of a a vignetting effect if you like. Just keep running the tool over those areas. Quick go over the landscape itself, just to bring out some of those darker tones. And then it's over to the dodge tool. This time we need to set our range to highlights instead of shadows. But the rest of it's set up pretty well. Once again, nice big brush, nice low exposure. And in fact, I'm just going to drop that brush size slightly down to around about 300 pixels. And then just work on some of these details, particularly around the subject. Just bringing out that extra detail, giving it a bit of zing. And after a few passes with the dodge tool, just running it over some of those slightly more distant areas too. If I just click on and off our dodged and burned layer and compare it to the original undodged and burned background layer, you can see that though that one's kind of looking okay, the sky's working quite well. Once we give it a little bit of extra contrast, it's certainly looking a lot more punchy. For more quick and simple ways to improve your landscapes, there's another special video lesson on this month's CD, so make sure you check that one out. But for our panoramic image, I think we're pretty much done. We've taken those 5 separate, pretty unremarkable pictures and turned them into one stunning wide view. And as you've seen, it's pretty quick and easy to do with Photoshop or Elements by your side, so make sure you get out there, shoot the raw materials for your own panoramic shot, and then have a go at stitching them all together on your PC. The only thing left to do really is come up to Layer and down to Flatten Image once more, just to take us back to a single background layer. And then you can save your brand new panoramic shot, ready for printing out or sending to your friends and family. But that's all from me. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial, and I'll see you next time.